Thank you very much. And as you say, very warm welcome to everybody who's joining us this afternoon for this exciting session on age-friendly housing. It builds on a number of other sessions we've run over the season of our Happy Hour programme. I'm so pleased to see that we have so many of you joining us. And in fact, the numbers are still rising, such as the popularity of this. We are delighted that we're joined by three excellent presenters, but also supporters of the LIN over a long period of time. And Paula and Alison in particular, and Rebecca, really pleased that you're able to join us. But as Jerome said, this is being co-hosted with Paula Broadbent, Managing Director at Lovell Later Living, a long-term supporter of the LIN. And Paula, so pleased to see you after I couldn't get to Yorkshire the other day, but a warm welcome to you, and I'll immediately hand over to you.
Many thanks, Jeremy, and welcome everybody to this afternoon's session. We really hope that you're going to enjoy the intel that both myself, Alison, and Rebecca are going to share with you. We've aimed to give you sort of a bit of a deep insight into how complex older persons housing can be. I think with particular focus on those most vulnerable throughout this afternoon's session. And so without further ado, I would like to kick this afternoon's session off, because what we would really like to aim to achieve is that we've got time at the end of all of our three presentations for questions and answers, because ultimately that's what we want you to get out of this afternoon. So please feel free to drop any questions as we go along into the chat, so that you don't have to remember further on, and we'll do our best to respond to everybody's questions as we proceed. So hopefully this will come through straight away.
It's coming up.
Have you got that?
Yeah, that's great.
Let me just put this in presentation mode. There we go. So, welcome everybody. As I say, I'm Paula Broadbent, Managing Director from Lovell Later Living. Lovell Later Living is a wholly owned subsidiary of Lovell Partnerships, who is part of the Morgan Sindall Group. As Jeremy says, we go back a long way personally with the HousingLIN. My career spans across the older and vulnerable persons housing and services sector for over 30 years. Working for a number of the large-scale housing associations such as Housing 21, Hanover and Anchor, but also spent a period of time leading North Yorkshire County Council's extra care housing before moving into the private sector as a developer. So the focus very much was how can we capture the successes of the past, and in particular our focus today on talking about the successes of extra care. And the principles of extra care and what those provide to customers, and then share with you where we've taken this now in partnership with Telford Council, who do send apologies. We were hoping to have a colleague sat here with me today as well, just in case there was any questions and answers, but I can relay any of those back if I'm not able to answer as we proceed through. So really this is thinking about how can we listen and learn. I think them are the real sort of core cultures to us, of thinking about what is it that customers actually need to live their best lives. And from my point of view now as a developer of the right solutions is, what do our partners need to deliver sustainable and meaningful services, and more importantly, outcomes. And the outcomes go right across the board, absolutely customer first. But ultimately as well, it's the outcomes for the public purse that this particular solution was focused on. So when we talk about designing age-appropriate solutions, we always think about, we must design looking through our customers' eyes. We must see and listen and feel what they feel and what they see and hear, to be able to absolutely put together something that is effective and meaningful. And absolutely sustainable as we move forward. So there's real outcomes that we have to focus on, that I've just grouped here into thinking very much about that independence, control and dignity, which is so important when we're looking in particular at housing, health and social care solutions. Apologies, it's stuck. So the partnership that we have with Telford, this is an artist's impression, and this is a major master plan in the town centre of Telford, sitting right on the main roundabout as you enter in, as you see here on the A5. And this is an artist's impression that we've put together of a block that we're in the process of designing and taking forward as a development with the council. But the key focus here was thinking about future-proofing. How can we learn from the successes of extra care and also learn from the challenges that many local authorities face in having outdated buildings that they're unable to remodel and do anything with going forward, and so often ends up in needing to demolish and build new rather than being able to retrofit. So as you can see, this is the scale of the master plan in total. And so there's a number of provisions going on here. This is all new build. It is a combination that will be creating a real inclusive community, including general needs housing, with also some commercial and hospitality. But there was a real focus from the council's point of view of how could they deliver to those more vulnerable in the locality, and also in addressing some of the real critical health issues that they were facing, that was putting really massive strain on the hospital, as we see right across the country, with many beds blocked by people who were just unable to return to living at home. We hosted a workshop with the council, and our approach is very much to sit down and actually listen to what are the local issues, what's the challenges that's being faced by the particular local authority, but more importantly, from the point of view of understanding where they are from a housing provision aligned with the pressures on health and social care budgets that they've got. So understanding very much about how many beds were they commissioning from the private sector, how many beds were they commissioning out of that locality, as well as looking at the housing needs and the strategy around that. Because this was very much thinking about how could we, on this building, which has got an outline consent where we could go up to 10 stories if we choose, how can we create a scheme that actually could be all things to all men? And thinking very carefully about how would we design that scheme to enable it to not just service the needs of, residential nursing care as well as supported living for people with sensory or physical impairment, but also think about more acute needs of people not living with just early onset dementia, but the later stages of dementia. And how can we support those people to continue to live in their own home? And also the council were also flagging up that they were having huge problems in being able to find appropriate housing for bariatric residents. So these residents were ultimately, the properties that had been built over the 60s and 70s, which is typically what was available through the council, just wasn't designed to an adequate standard to be able to accommodate them. So again, was placing further pressure on their residential care setting. This was a real game changer for me, because when you think about, and this is what we tried to look at when I was at North Yorkshire, was when you look at extra care and you analyse at what point does extra care start to fail people. We've designed it appropriately, we've designed it to be fully accessible, we've put services on site 24/7, so surely that should see everybody through to end of life and there shouldn't be an issue. But as we often know, that isn't the case for everybody, because the point where somebody requires a nursing intervention, i.e. a nursing service, and that community nursing service cannot maintain or cannot even provide in some instances because of the stress on resources on the district nursing team, then unfortunately people then have to move out into residential care, i.e. nursing care. So what we wanted to do here is, could we do all of that in a housing setting? Was that actually possible? And so we presented, to Peter Nunn and David Badham, who were both the registration lead and inspector lead for this particular area. And we talked through the principles of what we were aiming to do and shared with them our ideas. And this quote here is what actually they returned to us in an email. So from my point of view, I was quite excited at this point to actually get not just support from CQC, but receive it from CQC in writing. It was just like I'd just been given all my Christmas presents all at once. It was brilliant, because ultimately this is what was going to make a difference. They could really see that this innovative approach could and they would work with the council to achieve it, register the building as a housing provision. But the area that was purposely set aside to provide a registered nursing provision in registered nursing beds could be dealt with within that housing scheme. But the real key here was also that those services could be registered in a way that if anybody living in the rest of the building, in their either 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, their open plan apartment, if they required a nursing intervention for a period of time, that them services could reach out of the registered nursing setting into their own home. And this was great because we knew we were on the right track then and we could start to build it. So this is where we've got to it, and what we're adamant about doing, because I'm absolutely determined that what we can do is we can take the great successes of extra care and the principles around it, combined with the fact that it's a housing product, and in a sense create developments that have longevity. So that's why we call this next chapter, because this is about next chapter for the building. So how can we create not just the next chapter for the individuals who move here, and thinking about we will be able to provide the services, we will have a mix of accommodation that copes with the needs of customers in perpetuity, but how could we also do the same thing with the building to make sure that that who is investing in this asset and is going to own this asset in long term will be able to have that flexibility within the building to be able to very easily remodel and reshape the building to meet that present day future need. And so the building starts its life as 1 and 2 bedroom apartments. You know, they're a good standard, they work well, they would be typically, you know, a very sound housing asset investment. And then we've looked at how we can structure this so that we can look at how can we accelerate the delivery of these types of building. And a lot of the drivers were from this site because, you know, the rest of the region activity has already commenced and we're going to run out of time. We need to be moving quickly. So all this work started in January, and we're in a position now where we're finalising the designs with this scheme due to go to Telford's cabinet in the new year. So if it starts out life as that, what can it configure to? And so these are the different configurations. So where we're looking at a registered, nursing provision, then this building can very easily, in the same footprint on the same floor area, it can have an area where you're providing 14, circa 22 square metre registered beds that CQC are more than happy with. They're really good size ensuite rooms to provide a good level nursing service. But it's designed in this household fashion that's so popular because it means then it can be a very efficient staff team that can have that security and interaction and safeguarding that obviously the regulators are looking for. That same configuration can be also configured as supported living units. And the supported living units are designed purposely as a more open plan approach. So this is where we can look to service the needs of many different individuals. But again, if you took this approach where you maintained the household approach with the dining and the lounge and the kitchen area, and it could be operated in that way, you can very confidently accommodate and support safely people with even living with the very latest stages of dementia or more acute life-limiting condition. That same footprint can give you an additional unit by reducing that communal area, and that communal area then can either be just there as that small shared space, or in particular what we're looking at with Telford is how we can use the area as ancillary space, whether that's physiotherapy, but some complementary service that will then look at how does this scheme interact with the local hospital? How do we decentralise some of the services and the clinics and other things that are being provided presently at the hospital is the question that we were asking ourselves in response to what the council's needs were. And so again, this is where this configuration really comes into its own. Because we've standardised the structure of the building, the focus was very much about, okay, this is great. We've got this to work at Telford. We've looked at the outcomes that we can achieve. The financial model has been built and they're working through it. Homes England are more than happy to invest grant into this. the combined authority has also confirmed interest in supporting the scheme as well because of its innovation. So where we are now with this is looking at, okay, well, how can we really accelerate this model? We've designed it purposely so that it can be built in compartments structurally for pace. So we're working with an off-site manufacturer at present, where we're looking at the detail of this and making sure that this absolutely works, so that we could give the confidence of how quickly this development, this scheme could be built. The other thing with the structure is it can look very different on different sites, and that's what these configurations do. How can we have these arms, for want of a better description, that lock together so that it can cope with different shapes of sites, to even the point that it could just go straight up? You know, in the instance of Telford, you know, we may end up at full 10 stories by the time we've done. But how can we make, you know, that work and facilitate that as efficiently as possible? Excuse me. So just to summarise, hope that you found that sort of that run through Telford and the experience of what we're doing there interesting. You know, we are here really to think about, and I think we all have a responsibility in the sector to be thinking very much about how do we future-proof the solutions in which we design, and how do we put the customer right at the heart of what we're doing. And we do exactly the same thing with our other products, where we're a specialist housing developer for care-ready adaptive homes, both for sale and hopefully to rent as well in the future. We're in discussions with some partners to presently take that forward. But the difference with those homes is it's not typically following the traditional retirement housing model of apartment blocks. We've purposely gone with more low-rise offer, servicing the needs of people who are looking for, you know, a bungalow or a house that are you know, a community within a community. So these are development sites that are not gated communities, don't have service charges, we don't provide communal facilities. We develop these properties alongside existing amenities and existing providers. And that's me done. The slides will be shared afterwards by Jerome. And there is contact details on the slide that will come out.
Thank you, Paula.
Okay.
Great. So I think we're going to move right away to Rebecca Shafran. So just a quick introduction. So Rebecca is a Senior Associate Director at BNP Paribas Real Estate, leading on research for all operational residential markets, including healthcare, senior living, build to rent, and student housing. Rebecca also supports the residential capital market teams with market analytics and thought pieces, and she is a member of the Society of Property Researchers. So over to you, Rebecca. I will share your slides, so if you just let me know when you want me to move to the next slide, I'll do that for you.
Thanks, Jerome. Just whilst you're loading those up, I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to be involved with this session. And thanks for that introduction. I work in a team of specialists, so if anyone has any questions on other parts of the market, please do get in touch. Oh, what's going on?
Right.
Flicking through all my slides.
Straight to the end.
There we go. I'm very much focusing on, well, I'm mostly focusing on the retirement sector in this presentation, particularly kind of our assessment of the need for IRCs, integrated retirement communities. But a lot of what I say can be applied to all types of housing, really, for older people. So on my first slide, please, Jerome, if you don't mind scrolling, there we go. There's my agenda. I'm going to jump straight in, but this is my plan to, over the next 10 minutes, to show you our assessment of the need for appropriate housing, age-appropriate housing, some of the market challenges. Then we'll look at how we can overcome some of these hurdles and perhaps where some of the opportunities are for investors. So first slide, please, Jerome. Actually, and again, starting with assessing the need. I'm not going to spend too long on this slide because I'm sure many of you have already heard a lot of the stats on the population growth projections in this country, but just to say we are expecting 1.3 million additional over 75s living in the UK in the next 10 years, And we undertook some analysis around this time last year, actually, that looked at the existing provision of integrated retirement communities. And just to put the UK in line with markets such as Australia, New Zealand and the US, where around 5% of over 65s have access to this type of housing, we've estimated that there's a shortfall of 487,000 approximately units within retirement communities, just to bring the UK in line with those markets. Next slide, please. So why is it needed? Again, a lot of this, I imagine the audience today knows, but I will just go over these. The benefits of quality age appropriate housing are far and wide. One of the most cited facts is that poor quality housing costs the NHS £1.4 billion per year. The latest English housing survey noted that 3.4 million occupied dwellings, that's 14% of homes, aren't classed as non-decent. And so ARCO, along with the Housing with Care Task Force, which was launched earlier this year, also identify some of the benefits in terms of the impact on social care funding through just taking demand pressure off social care. These types of homes can boost physical and mental health of residents, reducing the number of GP and hospital visits. And also we see appropriate housing for older age cohorts as an opportunity to release some of the housing market at the top end of the market back in to supply figures. Also, you know, people that live on these in these retirement communities are more likely to participate in social events, reportedly, and that can also help with tackling issues like loneliness. And the last thing I would like to mention on this slide is that really the lack of choice is stifling the market, and more choice is needed. People are living longer. We're seeing an increase in renters in the UK. And there needs to be more choice for all age cohorts, actually, but specifically within this area. Next slide, please. And I thought these maps were really useful. So where is it needed? The title of this presentation, I think, was Unlocking Land Supply. And I thought these were useful. They're from the Chief Medical Officer's annual report, which actually was just released about 2 weeks ago, perhaps even last week. What these maps are showing is the shift in population of over 75s across the UK, actually across England, between 2021 and 2043. And on the chart on the left, we can see that people over the age of 75 already are skewed away from urban areas. It shows that there's a higher percentage of older adults in more peripheral areas, such as rural, coastal and remote areas. And those are the darker areas on the map on the left. And then the map on the right shows how people are expected to migrate away from cities before they reach older age. And so what happens is your urban areas maintain a similar demographic over time, but you end up with those peripheral areas aging faster. And also the proportion of working age people, who are the people that often provide care, is reducing in some of those more peripheral areas. And the report notes that whilst these areas are very welcoming and beautiful, they're underserved in healthcare, and they have less accessible transport links, insufficient infrastructure designed for older adults, and that includes housing within that. So I thought this was really interesting and relevant when we're considering this afternoon, you know, how we can unlock land supply for age appropriate housing, and where we might be unlocking it is not necessarily where we most need it. And that's often because of some of the market challenges. So if we can go on to my next slide, please. I'm going to pick up over the next 2 slides on 2 market challenges, starting with the construction market. We're in a challenging economic backdrop at the moment, and the high rate backdrop, and specifically the cost of debt, is impacting on new development. We've got higher finance costs and higher construction costs, and that's really challenging viability. And then we have a weak property outlook with elevated economic uncertainty. There's been high costs in the form of labour and materials, and combining all these things together means we've seen a slowdown in construction activity, and that is constraining the delivery of all types of homes, not just age appropriate homes, and therefore supply is just not increasing at the pace needed, and that's not really what we want to see in this sector, which we know needs a delivery of more supply and is really a socio-economic necessity. The second challenge is sorry, moving on to the next slide, is on the planning system. And ARCO in 2020 shared views of its members and identified 4 key barriers within the planning system. One being the lack of knowledge about the retirement community offer among planning authorities. 2 is the lack of a clear definition and treatment in the planning system. So for me, I think 1 and 2 really refer to the lack of clarity and lack of guidance in supporting specialist housing under the C2 land use type. 3 was a lack of shared understanding of the need, and I think this really points to really the ticking demographic time bomb and understanding the socioeconomic benefits that this type of housing can bring, taking pressure off social care and providing alternative housing options with flexible care needs and support like you find in IRCs. And number 4 was lack of resources in planning departments, and this is across the country where we see underfunded and under-resourced planning departments. Moving on to the next slide, please. So I've identified 2 of the biggest challenges I think the sector faces. Where do we go from here? Next slide, please. So the National Planning Policy Framework reforms, we're waiting for those. We were expecting them, but what we have seen, according to the HBF, the Home Builders Federation, is that around 60 local plans have publicly paused or been withdrawn. We also have an election coming up, and this means that there are a lot of plans currently being put on hold. Rather helpfully, the HBF also published a report just last week or the week before called Firmer Foundations, and they suggested 10 proposals to get things moving along a little bit. And number 8 is what's included on this slide. So strengthen the statutory duty on local planning decision makers to accord special attention to the need to plan for housing for older people in their local plans and housing needs assessments. And the Housing and Care Task Force is bringing key stakeholders together and is driving some of this change. And I think I've just included on this chart some of what is needed. The clear housing provision targets for older people within each local plan, clear definition for IRCs within the planning systems under a separate use class, and clear guidance on how to treat IRCs for the purposes of SIL and affordable housing. Next slide, please. My second offering this afternoon, if you like, is to overcome these hurdles, is one centred around how the sector best markets itself. You know, how do we shift cultural perceptions about this sector? We certainly need to recognise the role younger family members can play in the decision making and engage with them as well as the potential residents. Logical aspect with moving at this point in life, but reality is that IRCs often exceed expectations, you know, challenging traditional perceptions of senior housing. But we also believe there's wider, more strategic marketing that could take place to show off the wide-reaching benefits, and not just to consumers, but to investors and developers. And that this type of investment is certainly needed to help the sector grow. And actually, we've written a quick plug, but we've written a thought piece on marketing strategies for this sector, and it is on our website, so feel free to have a browse of that. My last 2 slides, I wanted to make consider kind of land supply for this type of housing and where are those opportunities. So next slide, please. Firstly, you know, are we looking at suburban locations or urban locations? A lot of investor attention is very focused on the southeastern London market, but as those maps showed earlier, that's not necessarily where we should be looking for potential sites. Whilst urban locations do offer better access to amenities and local communities and staff, suburban locations can offer much more space, more peaceful environment, more green space, and importantly for investors, I think biodiversity net gain in suburban locations is probably going to be easier. And there's new legislation due for publication this month. It won't become mandatory until January, but it will require developers across England to deliver 10% biodiversity net gain when building new housing, industrial or commercial developments. And we know from our Housing Futures, Frost and Parker Housing Futures survey, that 86% of those over the age of 66 said it was an important that their next home was already environmentally friendly and sustainable. And so I think that's quite an interesting point in the suburban versus urban argument. And the last slide was whether, there we go, whether we consider repurposing versus new builds. And I think, Paula, you touched on retrofitting. You might be wondering why I'm showing a picture of the London city market skyline on this slide. Refurbishing can be more environmentally friendly than building from scratch. And when land is in short supply and we've got a challenging construction market, this could be the way forward to bring some more supply of older people housing to market. In the commercial sectors recently, we've seen occupiers leave stock where it's missing the mark in terms of environmental efficiency. And this has actually led to some higher vacancies across secondary and tertiary office stock in some of our cities, whilst the best office stock is seeing increased demand. But that does mean that there's repurposing opportunities in city centres with older, not fit for purpose office space with the potential to be changed into student housing, hotels, or homes for older people. So I think that's where I'm going to stop. I know there was quite a lot in that presentation, but hopefully it's given you a bit of food for thought on how, as a sector, we can unlock the delivery of appropriate homes for older people. Times are very challenging right now, but it doesn't mean we should be downing tools. Really, quite the opposite. As the economic backdrop improves, hopefully the sector can rapidly grow.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. So I think without further ado, we're going to move on straight away to Alison for the last presentation before we all get back together for the Q&A. So I'm just, Alison, while you get ready for your presentation, I'm just going to quickly introduce you. So Alison Benzimra is Head of Research and Influence at United Saint Saviour charity. Alison has extensive experience in the aging research field. As manager of the Whiteley Foundation for Aging Well, she gained valuable insight into the almshouse movement and worked closely with residents, staff, and academic partners on a variety of research projects. Alison is passionate about supporting and building capacity for researchers in aging, and is on the British Society of Gerontology's Emerging Researchers in Aging Committee.
Can I share? Oh, sorry.
No, that's it. I think that's it, Alison, if you're happy with that, unless there was anything else you wanted to add.
No,
I'll let you get on with your presentation.
Thanks, Jerome. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's great.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
Full.
Oops.
If you go in presentation mode.
Hold on.
That's it. Great.
There you go.
Thank
Great.
you.
So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, Jerome. Thank you for that introduction. As Jerome mentioned, I'm Alison Benzimra, and I'm Head of Research and Influence at United Saint Saviour's charity. Today, I'm going to tell you more about the charity and specifically tell you more about our new scheme, Appleby Blue, in the middle of central London, in Southwark Park Road. We've spoken a lot about, buildings today, but crucially, I want to highlight today that the age-friendly practices within that building also make it an age-friendly environment. So United Saint Saviour's was established in 1541. So we've had over 500 years of addressing the needs of older people living in Southwark. Over the centuries, we've gathered a portfolio of investment properties. The charity owns the pubs around Borough Market. I've specifically chosen these two images as it represents the charity. We're very much grounded in our historic origins, but it also demonstrates that we are a modern and forward-thinking organization. The income from our investment properties funds our community investment program. So we support charities and organizations in the borough, which is essential to the relationships that we have, especially with related to our housing provision. So as I mentioned, we provide housing for older people in financial and housing need. We've got 3 almshouses. One is behind the Tate Modern, another one is in Purley, and then our newest almshouse is Appleby Blue. We also have research and influencing initiatives. So we're keen to learn how to improve our practices, but also to share our learnings more widely with the housing and aging sectors. So this is Appleby Blue. We opened the doors in July. And it's been almost a 9-year journey to get to that point. So the site used to be occupied by a council-owned care home that was no longer fit for purpose. And Appleby Blue was the result of a Section 106, and it was a really good example of a tripartite arrangement between the council, a private developer, and the charity. Appleby Blue is designed by Sterling Prize award-winning architects Witherford, Watson, and Mann. And we've had a very close relationship with the architects and the design process. The building has maintained the traditional almshouse model. So there is a central courtyard design with glazed corridors. So neighbors get to see one another. In consulting residents in our other almshouses, residents came back with the feedback that they didn't want to have their own private balcony, that they would never use, that they much rather have a place to sit where they can engage with their neighbors. So the corridors are really wide. There are benches outside everyone's homes, and it's really joyful to see neighbors sitting on the benches and looking out, but also getting to chat to their neighbors as they walk by. In order to kind of deinstitutionalize the environment, the corridors are non-heated. So as people leave their homes, it's like they're going out into their wider community. Embedded in the building is a community center, which you can see at the bottom left-hand corner. And behind that is a community kitchen. So we're wanting that the building is an asset to the wider community so that organizations and groups can also access the spaces. And then it will also then be a space for intergenerational activity. You can see at the bottom there, there's a double volume glazed frontage, and that's actually a bus stop in the front. So often older people in housing settings are withdrawn from the society, and we almost wanted to reverse that. Instead of it being a retreat, we wanted passerbys to see the vibrancy of older people living their day-to-day lives. We also, as I mentioned, in an inner city environment, and particularly in the social housing sector, sheltered housing schemes are very limited in choice. They're often poor design, poor location, and poor services. And we really wanted to make Appleby Blue an aspirational choice so that people would want to come and live here, and then also free up that chain of homes available. We partnered with Bayes Business School earlier this year and published a report called the Almshouse Longevity Study, where they analyzed the death records of almshouse residents. And what it showed is that residents living in almshouses enjoyed a longevity boost compared to the same socioeconomic demographic living into the wider community. And that's been a really interesting study. But I think where we are now as an organization is to kind of understand why that is and to unpick that. So although age-friendly housing refers to residential spaces designed or adapted to accommodate specific needs of older adults and promote independence and quality of life, I thought the World Health Organization's definition, which emphasizes practices, should be considered in the housing context. The physical design provides the blueprint for the intangible benefits of age-friendly housing. I love happy hours and I attend as many as I can. And on one happy hour, a speaker described housing as a basin, and that each tap that flows into that basin is health and social care, and that housing is the vessel that holds us all together. And this visual makes complete sense when we think of Professor Michael Marmot's social determinants of health and the impact housing and the environment can have on the health and well-being, particularly in later life. For example, the work of the Center for Aging Better and Demos have done around the triple dividend of housing, and particularly the report Overcoming the Health and Care Polycrisis. And this is particularly evident when an older person is discharged from hospital. Their house, its adaptations and its accessibility, and the support within the bricks and mortar influences the older person's recovery and either increases or decreases their risk of admission. It's important to remember that age-friendly housing does not mean taking away perceived control in the lives of older people. An interesting study in the 1970s explored the effects of choice and enhanced personal responsibility for care home residents. In the study, residents at a nursing home were randomly assigned to two groups. One group was told that they could arrange their furniture as they wanted, go where they wanted, spend time with whom they wanted, and so forth, and were given a plant to care for. The other group was told that the staff was there to take care and help them, including watering a plant given to each of them. During the study, and 18 months later, residents who were given more control and personal responsibility had improved health. And among those whom control had not changed, a greater proportion had died. So what this study highlights is that personal control is not only essential for autonomy, but it also has implications on health and well-being. In developing age-friendly housing settings, we need to take the time to consider how we communicate our support services to our residents. And this is the ethos of our resident support model. Each of our sites has a resident support team that works closely with one another. Our team assists residents ensuring they are accessing the benefits that they are eligible and navigating particularly the council's website. We offer weekly digital literacy sessions where residents can learn how to book NHS appointments online and do online banking. We also have a telecare system where residents can push the I'm OK button if they choose to. But we find that this is really beneficial in keeping our resident support team connected to the residents. And although the residents live in self-contained flats, there's an awareness that as mobility issues evolve, we do assist residents in managing care packages, and we work closely with the social services. Our resident support model is a cog in the wheel in Appleby Blue being an age-friendly environment, but the other aspect is building community. So building a sense of community is probably the most nuanced of the age-friendly initiatives at Appleby Blue. I discovered a recent study that showed that time alone is only a risk factor for loneliness when it's pervasive, especially for older adults. So we can spend up to 75% of our time alone without feeling isolated. So the best cure for loneliness is not more frequent interaction, it's more meaningful interaction. So how do we create a community that is welcoming, where people feel that they belong without it feeling engineered or an imposition? The first aspect is nurturing a community within a community. And again, that's where the building design fosters this with the central courtyard, the wide open corridors, and the rooftop garden. So residents have plenty of opportunity to bump into each other. We also host regular coffee mornings so neighbors can get to know each other better. And then food being the social glue, the Appleby kitchen is bringing residents together to bake cakes, jollof rice. We had a Thanksgiving dinner, and then we're picking herbs from the rooftop garden to use in the kitchen. We're also working with Bournemouth University on a community-based food model project, and this has been an immense learning on how to co-produce activities, and particularly following the lead of residents in a really organic way. The other aspect in community building is welcoming those living in the surrounding community into Appleby Blue, that the building is an asset to the wider community and that they view the older residents as an asset. So we're doing this by ensuring there's an array of activities that appeal to all interests, and then providing opportunities for intergenerational engagement. And this is where our research and learning is integral to the work that we're doing. As I mentioned, we want to ensure that the environment fosters a sense of belonging for everyone. This includes areas such as being inclusive of culturally appropriate food being cooked in the kitchen, that people, irrespective of disability or mobility, can attend activities, and that the space is welcoming of all age groups. And we're doing this through sharing and learning with other housing providers. For example, SJMT has been doing some great work around EDI, and that's been fantastic learning with them on how we can improve our EDI policies and practices. Tonic Housing, which is an LGBTQ plus housing provider, has shared with us great knowledge around developing community charters with residents and staff. And I suppose we understand that creating an age-friendly housing environment means that we gather and share intelligence with all our stakeholders, but particularly our residents. Going back to the analogy of housing being a basin for health and social care, we partnered with the University of Stirling, with the Social Care Institute of Excellence, Dunhill Medical Trust, and the HousingLIN to bring the serious game to Southwark. The actual game was hosted at Southwark Council offices, and it brought different professionals working in these sectors to play the game, where teams were divided into different groups, and they had to develop solutions for an increasing age of population in the fictitious Hope Town. This was a really great way to break down the silos, and it has already led to collaborations, and the serious game will be producing a report which will inform the council's future planning and strategic work for housing older people in Southwark. So I hope that I've not only presented an amazing age-friendly building, Appleby Blue, but also demonstrated that housing can play a central role in influencing the practices, services, and partnership working, which ensures that an age-friendly housing environment is extended into an age-friendly community and borough. As I mentioned, we are definitely a knowledge exchange organization, so please do feel free to get in touch. We would love to hear from you. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Alison. That was brilliant. So yeah, I'm now going to hand over back to Paula and Jeremy, if they're still with us, to chair the Q&A session. You're muted, Paula.
Apologies, I dropped off a minute there. The internet was unfortunately unstable. I don't know what's going on out there. So hopefully you can hear me
Yes,
again now.
Very well.
I've been answering a number of the questions in the chat, but when the internet dropped off, I was in the process of answering a couple and they've sort of disappeared. So I've only got the latest ones. So apologies if people are still waiting, if they want to sort of reissue. I personally found that there were some really key points there that are quite pertinent to the sector and to all operators. And it is very much around that focusing on choice and remembering that we're all individuals and that doesn't change in later life. And we need to be very mindful of that. And we need to be thinking about the choices, not just of the accommodation we live in, but actually the environment and the feel of the lifestyle that we're being offered, and meeting not just that day-to-day, but also cultural needs and other needs for activity. And I think the other key point as well was very much around the pressures and the challenges on the sector that Rebecca was raising around, we know what the demand is. We hear the numbers over and over and over again, but ultimately the real key challenges is that we've got systems and policies in place that are really not fit for purpose, in particular the planning system. And, the challenges around cost at the moment with what's happened with the economy and the pressures on cost around new build, we need to definitely start thinking creatively. I think you're absolutely right, Rebecca. We need to start thinking creatively about the existing buildings we've got and how we can do things more efficiently. But I think that there's a key element here as well around, and it was mentioned a couple of times in the questions and answers that I'd sent back some answers to, which was very much around land and how can we achieve the viability on schemes. And often the answer there is partnership, and that there's often, challenges that organisations can have a great idea, or they can have a great service and they can have a great culture, but doing it on their own is very, very challenging. Whereas if they're partnering with the right organisation, then that's key. Jeremy, do you want to add some thoughts to that? and then we'll just pick up some of the questions because I
I
haven't
just
got.
wondered if we could pick up, and Paul, can I also thank you for answering so many of them as well, because I think you've really sort of cracked quite a few, but there's still some, and I do encourage you to, anybody still watching, to go through and look at the answered section in the Q&A box. But we've got about 17 or so questions in about 7 minutes, and I'm not sure we're going to do justice to all of them. So I'm just wondering whether, for example, Tony Johnson raises issues around the cost-benefit issues around the studies, and particularly sort of impact on savings, I suppose, to the public purse around single occupancy in relation to health, hospital discharge. Are there any information that people can share on that? Rebecca or Paula or Alison?
I'm just trying to think how best to answer that. Again, I think it comes back to there being options and choice, to allow people to have options to move out of their existing accommodation into something where they have the support that they need. Paula, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I can add to that, because obviously Telford's just been going through his financial modelling now. There was a question in there that I did answer, because it was saying about the viability of residential as well, about, you know, saying that typically you would be looking at 40, 50, 60 beds rather than the 14. I mean, ultimately, there was a lot of work that went into, it was with a colleague, Sue Cawthray, some of you may know, who from the HousingLIN in Yorkshire. As an operator, I did a piece of work with her at North Yorkshire, where we looked at what was the optimum model size, as in number of beds that a staff team could service to operate very efficiently under the household model. Because people are they're multi-skilled, so you haven't just got personal carers and then a separate team, auxiliary and a separate team catering. You've actually got multi-skilled staff are doing all of those services, so you do get your service efficiencies. I think the other thing that we've gone through the process with is there is a huge opportunity for local authorities to invest to save. The more people that you can keep living in their own home, keeping out of a hospital bed in the first place, and definitely keeping out of residential care long term, there is huge savings to be had. And it varies across the country, but typically you'd be looking at savings of circa £800 a week versus a cost of a service where you're looking at a combined offer in a household model of around £300 a week. So there is definitely efficiencies to be had around the services. And ultimately, it allows either the operator or the local authority, which is in our instance, to draw funding from elsewhere. So the housing model will attract that grant funding, whereas your institutional model, it doesn't. There isn't then pots of money there to support it. So I think that was, was the other thing.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Paula, I know the Extra Care Charitable Trust did a really interesting piece of work with Aston University to try and quantify that sort of net efficiency savings, and the LIN produced a report based on some of those findings for the local government association with Southampton Council. Jerome might be able to put that report, which put again some cost figures on there as well.
Yeah.
Just running through a number of the other questions and observations. Daniela, you asked about the Serious Game Pack. Is it available? The pack will be made available once the work with the Dunhill funded work with Alison and Sky and Stirling University is completed. There is an indication about how that operates in a report that Stirling University published about 3 or 4 years ago, which looked at sort of a cross analysis of England, Scotland and Wales approaches to housing for older people. Well, again, we'll try and put that in the chat box.
Can I just add to that, Jeremy?
Yeah, please do.
So the Serious Game, I mean, the report is still being drafted and will be published shortly. But just as an organisation, it has just bringing the Serious Game to Southwark has already opened a partnership working. So we are immediately, and our partners are immediately experiencing the benefit of just bringing people together in one room and breaking down those silos and seeing how joint up partnership working can really have a benefit.
Right. Thanks very much for Ishak pointing out the event that's taking place this week. We also have that web link on our events page if anybody is interested. Again, for Rebecca, is the trend for older people to migrate out of urban centres to the idylls of rural and coastal areas. Any thought about inward migration within the UK?
Yeah, I think that I think there was a question also about whether the 487,000 shortfall
Yes, there was.
took into account multi-generational, and I think they're kind of tied together, because I think first of all that 487,000 was just giving 5% of over 65s access to this integrated retirement communities, so it's not saying that it's for everyone. But I think that's where the multi-generational point is also interesting, and can apply to how we use town centres and that obsolescent commercial space within town centres, and repurpose it, because cities play a really important role as well, don't they, in bringing communities together. It's a ready-made community in an urban space, whereas you don't necessarily have that in some of those other locations. And also there's an opportunity for residents to be giving back to local economies. So I think, you know, it's not every person over the age of 75 wants to leave the city that they live in and their families in, and I recognise that fact. But again, it's about those options. It's about having the right housing in the right places with the right level of support and care.
Yeah, can I just pick up finally, there was one there from Roy that said about the broad investor community and lobbying for incentivisation of people to move. I think that's absolutely a key point, and we shouldn't lose that. There needs to be some incentivisation. I'm sure you agree, Rebecca, of, you know, what can we capture from, you know, the research and the information to bolster the work of the, you know, the older person task force, for example, and lobbying and saying we need to stop just thinking about first time buyers and remember those last time movers. You know, how can we incentivise people to move sooner? Because that means that people are in the right environment then for ageing.
Yeah, exactly. Moving kind of before their care needs are greater, and it becomes a bit more challenging a move, actually. And that again comes down to those perceptions of the sector and kind of the marketing and targeting the families as well as the residents, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that choice, isn't it? It's remembering we need a wide variety of choice, not just in relation to tenure, but, you know, the physical form and the services.
Yeah.
Last week you had the happy hour on marketing housing for older people, and it was an interesting point is that people don't self-identify as old. So when you're talking about housing for older people, it's not them, that's for somebody else. So it's kind of going deeper down into the psychology of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Needs a whole new name.
Yeah, and again, as a member of the task force, I know that's something we're really keen to explore even further. So I think the points that are made by all three of you today have been so relevant for the task force. I think I will make sure that the recording is shared amongst the task force members as well. So that's been great. Look, Paula, can I just ask you to say some final words and then I'll sum up?
Yeah. I mean, my final words, I'll keep it brief because of time, it's going to shut off. I'd like to thank Alison and Rebecca. I think, you know, hopefully everybody will agree. We've tried to give you a bit of a broad coverage and perspective and our views and knowledge, but there's lots more out there, I'm sure, from everybody else. But it really just comes down to we need to collaborate as a sector. We need to collaborate. We need to share, and we need to look at how we can accelerate delivery of these solutions, basically, by working together.
Well, thank you. And on behalf of the HousingLIN, can I thank all three of you for such excellent contributions. It's been a really fantastic happy hour. We don't actually have a happy hour next week. The one after is on the 12th of December, when our Welsh colleagues will be putting the spotlight on what's happening around age-friendly Wales. So please do join us if you have an interest in what's going on across the border of the UK, within the UK, and then we conclude our happy hour sessions with Lord Best doing a review of HAPPI design principles and 15 years that they've been around. So again, another one that will follow very neatly from what all of you have highlighted around age-friendly design today. So look forward to welcome you to those sessions later on in December. In the meantime, again, can I thank the team behind the scenes for helping to put this on, and for everybody who stayed on just after 5 o'clock to this excellent session with Paula, Alison and Rebecca. Thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you very soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.